Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Wow, wir sind total begeistert. Volles Haus heute Abend. Herzlich willkommen in der Villa 102. A warm welcome to Villa 102. Tonight's event is in English, so please bear with me. Thank you for the German-speaking audience to take the patience with this. Our target is to reach a global audience, and we use English as a tool of communication here. But if you have questions later on and you would like to raise them in German, don't hesitate to do so. We can translate as we go along. Warm welcome, Clara Jo. We're so delighted to have you. My name is Daniela Leikam. I'm responsible for the arts and culture funding programs at the foundation and curator here at Villa 102, a platform that we have started to establish as a platform for cultural dialogue, for interaction with art, with artists, to communicate our programs, the subjects to be discussed, but also to offer another stage to the fellows of our program. Spotlight is a new format we've established quite recently. This is the second edition of it. Last year we welcomed Cambodian artist Kwai Sam Nang, who brought his guests and collaborators to do a dance performance, Popil, here in this very room. And tonight we're welcoming Clara's work as a second edition. We're doing this program in order to keep in touch with the artists in our programs. How are you doing? How has your work developed since you've been part of the foundation? And yeah, I'm delighted for this, and we're delighted for all of you to be here to join us on this. Tonight's project will touch upon complex subjects of layers of history, how to talk about historical narratives and the complexity of it, and an architectural landmark as the Villa 102 is always a special place to do so. It's not just any space, it also has its own history, and yeah, I wish all of us a wonderful and insightful evening. I'm going to introduce Clara now briefly before I pass them on to her. So Clara is a Berlin-based artist, and she's a graduate of Bard College in New York. She's also a graduate of the Institut für Raumexperimente and the UDK in Berlin, Universität der Künste. She has exhibited her work internationally and in Germany, among others, the Arco Art Center in Seoul, but also there was a beautiful exhibition at the Edith Russ House for Medienkunst in Oldenburg, including other spaces in London, Berlin, etc. In 2020-2021, Clara was a fellow of the Mutations program that KfW Stiftung implemented in cooperation with the Akademie Schloss Solitude in Stuttgart. A very multi-layered program that expanded over several years. She was part of a group of residents that were dealing with the topic mutations from very interdisciplinary and individual angles, and it culminated in an exhibition at this very space here at Villa 102 that we showed in December and January just now. So we just closed the exhibition in January. I know that some of you in the audience have seen this show, and you might remember the 3-channel work. It was right over there, where as a filmmaker you accompanied a team of scientists in Myanmar and Kenya, and The Anima was the title of the work. We will start with that in a little bit. Tonight's project takes us to a new site, a new location on the historical map of narratives in this sense. Mauritius, Flat Island, a former quarantine island. Mauritius is, for some people, an island of holidays, and that's maybe the most uninteresting aspect of it, in my opinion. It's an island with a very dense history, with a lot of cultural entanglements through Portuguese, Dutch, French, British influences over the centuries. In '68, Mauritius became independent on 12th of March, actually, which is just a few days down the calendar for us. And Flat Island is a tiny, tiny little island just off Mauritius that was used for indentured workers coming through, and they would have to spend some weeks there before being transported further. These indentured workers came mainly from the Southeast Asian, South Asian area, and we will hear a little bit more about this. So Clara's work, it's very characteristical, I guess. So you accompany scientists with the video camera, and this is something you will lay out for us now. I'm going to leave the floor to you and wish us all a wonderful evening.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone, first of all, Daniela Rose, the KfW Stiftung, the Villa 102 teams, and also the wonderful technical team tonight. So I'd like to begin by shortly speaking about a work that I just finished, The Anima, which Daniela mentioned was on view during the Mutations exhibition here at Villa 102. And then later a work in progress tentatively titled Nests of Basalt, Nests of Wood. In both works, although taking place in very different locations and time periods, I experienced them through their unique textures, memories, and layers of history. The first story begins in this cave here in Myanmar. It was one of the first images I filmed during an overnight shoot with Smithsonian wildlife veterinarians back in 2018. Their global health program had been working for many years at such high-risk sites of high-risk human-animal interface, meaning areas where humans and animals are in close proximity. Here they were hunting for new strains of coronaviruses to predict their pandemic potential at their source before large-scale epidemics occur. Their work had been underway for many years as they warned about the inevitability of future outbreak. It was not a question of why, but more so of when. For me, the work is not a reaction, but rather speaks to the next pandemic, my own origin story beginning in the caves. Blame and responsibility for contagion has lied with what has been perceived as foreign, a historically rooted fear that rendered racialized and gendered bodies a threat, delegating them to the realm of the wild. This desire to tame, contain, and control was further propagating this fear. Stigmatization of individual bodies as carriers and vectors was far overshadowing collective responsibility, such as exploitative human intervention on the environment. This work feeds into ongoing questions about crossing physical and psychological thresholds, about the collective responsibility we face in order to deal with the inevitability of future pandemics, the psychological intricacies of how we process epidemic crisis, and the realities of xenophobia and racism that they engender. I continue this thread of research by going back in time to look at other historical manifestations of militarization of public health, perhaps as a testament to how easily we forget. The following are images, fragments, short vignettes for an as-of-yet unrealized film based on speculative conversations and documentary propositions. I play with this idea of fiction within moments of disappearance to tell difficult stories, this time along epidemiological routes, and how they feed into collective imaginations and amnesia around fear of contagion. In July 2022, I filmed with a group of archaeologists who are working in collaboration with the Mauritian Archaeology and Cultural Heritage Project on Flat Island. Flat Island is an islet located 12 kilometers off the north coast of Mauritius. It had been used as a 19th century quarantine and detention station for indentured labor during several waves of the cholera epidemics. It was chosen as a quarantine station in 1856 due to its distance away from the mainland in order to confine epidemics during this time of increased exchange and travel. The archaeological team was conducting land surveys and researching the material culture of Flat Island in order to get a glimpse of how the population lived at the time. While I am editing now, I look back on the journal I kept while filming. I was mostly writing down different feelings and sensations that were difficult to capture in the image material. Throughout, I was trying to weave together a story, to find another narrative voice besides my own. One of the first entries describes arriving to Flat Island. We rode a catamaran for about an hour and a half and quickly pitched tents next to the beach. I remember the first night sleeping to the sound of sea and rain. I was especially drawn to the different textures of the islet, the different traces humans left behind that alluded to life and death. I was curious to see how one could learn about life after death, or even through death. Colonists built these stone structures as pharmacies, hospitals, and quarantine barracks for use before disembarking to Mauritius. Eventually, the wooden roofs decomposed and deteriorated, but the stone foundations remain and peek through the overground land. The structures that still stand have witnessed the evolution of healthscapes, social biases, medical beliefs, and especially quarantine modalities that have quite literally chiseled into the land division, segregation, and inequality. Although the practice of quarantine had been used as an effective means to prevent disease spread since the Middle Ages, the quarantine system implemented by colonial powers in the Afrasian Sea only affirmed political borders, institutionalized forms of social containment and control, and discriminatory detention measures targeted at individuals arriving to the island under the indenture system, which became even more pronounced during moments of epidemiological crisis. I began to film these different material imprints. I wasn't sure if there were monuments, shrines, memorials, whether they had formed naturally over time or had been erected by humans, whether they were meant to be remembered or forgotten. These included water wells, nests, ruins, tools, and homes. It was all very ambiguous. I felt like there were receptacles for cultural memory, trauma, specters of a past marked by violence, but perhaps even commemoration. What stuck with me the most was seeing the persistence of nature and disease, trying to break through and reclaim, hints of another life in this eternal struggle despite human endeavor. As we walked searching for these lost structures, our feet got tangled in the overground land. I wasn't sure if the land was telling us to leave or stay. The host felt quite unwelcome. I could only imagine how human life had once occupied these spaces, the cramped quarters, the sounds and smells. Shortly after filming, I made a research trip to several archives in London. I was curious what had been documented around this time period. Although there had been meticulous record keeping, there was a dearth of information, or rather excluded within these biased archives. I am working with writer Akhil Gopi to develop a speculative narrative from the perspective of the endemic seabird still inhabiting Flat Island, who passes down oral histories inherited from their ancestors of all they have witnessed from an aerial perspective. Perhaps one of their ancestors in another life had also witnessed these moments of crisis, where the burden and blame of infectious disease did not fall on those destroying the land to make room for expanding industries, but on those very bodies who were cultivating it. I wonder if the cacophony of voices once confined within the institution walls could be resurrected, where their bodies are released from production and their role as carriers is dissolved. This voice will hopefully address the transgenerational effects of disappearance and offers an alternative reading of the terrain through these deep erasures and geological scars. Although this gaze from above is perhaps another form of imperial mapping, I felt that it could also be a way to more clearly see the divisions entrenched in what remains. We have tentatively titled the work Nests of Basalt, Nests of Wood, in order to convey how these architectural and material divisions could have been perceived from this perspective. Oftentimes in my work, I like to mix real-life footage with animations rendered in video game engines to create speculative worlds. I'm also working with artist Noam Rezgui to create a magical realist space for these images and voices that have been forgotten or excluded from colonial accounts and archives to perhaps be heard and seen once again. To reconstruct these pieces of history and tackle epidemics of ideological viruses as well. These initial 3D renders portray a cosmic ocean during times of periodic annihilation and renewal of the world. I'd like to carve routes through ocean space in order to tell these stories, of commemoration, agency, resistance, and dignity. Water here not only cleanses and washes up secrets, but are nodes for disease transmission, for which cholera erupted in the wake of typhoons and floods. Monsoons enabled these encounters, and the currents influenced the evolution of how the body is conceived in relation to histories of mercantile empire, epidemics, and migration. I imagine these stories resonating within a certain stillness or silence, perhaps during moments of vulnerability in between the turbulence of the monsoon winds. I will share with you now an English translation excerpt of the voiceover text, which is still under development. They are here to unravel the mystery of those islets, inhabited, then abandoned by their ancestors in a past not so distant. But their memory is a burst of brine upon the rocks, scattered and evanescent. The water holds our secrets, which are washed ashore by the waves, or made to whirl by the winds, and to remember, all we have to do is listen, watch, feel. The unfeathered bipeds do not understand the language of the sea, the song of the island. However, they have made their parchments in this black ink, made of soot and oil, in which they sometimes dip our fallen feathers, so as not to forget themselves. How to interpret this wrinkle in their features, then, as they trace with their fingers a map sketched by their forebears? If I could talk to them, I would tell them. Our memory is also the memory of the island. It inhabits its cracks and ravines, its scarps and plateaus, trails through its lianas and groves, veins its ragged earth. Even if we have short lifespans, like the unfeathered bipeds, we who are born in the island's bosom are impregnated with the knowledge of a past of millions of years, and that thickens the first cry of our fledglings. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. I feel privileged that we got to see this work in progress of a work you're at the moment finalizing to show in a show in Berlin in Gropiusbau that will open mid-April. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, wow. So if we think of the work that's on the screen here, taking place in Myanmar, where you followed the zoonosis research team, then you travel to Flat Island, you follow these archaeologists from Stanford University. You find these individual examples of a feel of unease in looking at global health structures and global health crisis. You connect the dots between epidemical entanglements in colonial histories. How do you find these subjects, or do the subjects find you?
I mean, for the first project here, it was under the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, and I really approached the wildlife veterinarians there, and I think I was at the time just driven by this sense of curiosity. I wasn't quite familiar with what they were doing. I having several conversations with them, and so we decided to apply together to it, and then it just opened up an entire world. For the second project, I was invited by the curators to look at the Indian Ocean or the Afrasian Sea in a very different lens. And through my research, I again stumbled upon this research group, and I just emailed them, explaining what I was doing. And luckily, they were very open to artists coming on board. And we had several conversations to that. And so I think, yeah, for myself as well, I just feel really privileged that I met people working in academia and science who are open to artists coming in and looking at the work in a very, very different way.
Yeah, you take on quite a specific role there as an artist, accompanying these scientists, trying to capture what they do, at the same time be somewhat invisible. We saw some footage of you taking the boat, arriving on Flat Island at the beginning. What does it mean for you as a person to do this kind of research? Where do you sleep? What did you eat? Can you tell a little bit about what it means to be on Flat Island for this?
I mean, I was briefed shortly before arriving, but I just couldn't really imagine the... I have to say, ultimately, I was the weak link with a group of archaeologists, but I adjusted quickly to it. But at the moment, yeah, Flat Island is uninhabited aside from the Coast Guard, so we had to bring in all the provisions with us. There was no...
you can't buy food anywhere, I assume.
So we had to bring everything. But I mean, it was very much a team effort, and I never pitched a tent before. It was the first time, and I suffered the first night, but I learned quickly, I think.
How big was the team? How many people were there?
I have to remember, I think there was maybe 8 to 10 people there initially. But they had worked together before, so it was quite a harmonious group. And yeah, again, it was just this way of the collaboration, working together, and really supporting, filling in where the weak joints are, let's say, and having a common vision, I think. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because in your practice there is sort of a 2-step process, or maybe 3 steps or a million steps, but the one after you've done your research and found the field, you go and do like field work on site, so to say, with all the physical experience this includes, and then later on you have an editing process behind your desk. And maybe can you share a little bit with us what it means to, as an artist, to gather the material there? How do you know what to film? How do you know when to step back? Do you participate in the processes of these scientists at work? Do they interact with you as a filmer? How do I have to imagine this?
I mean, for me, there's a lot of research that goes into the work beforehand, but that completely changes once I'm on site, so I can pretty much throw it out. But in a way, I have to be clear with myself about what the story I want to tell, which is very selective, that determines the images that I shoot. So in a way, when I'm filming, I don't want to overshoot, but I want to be very selective. And so it's very much an observation process, but I think the most fruitful things comes from the conversations that we have. That's really guiding the narrative as well. And I try to assure them, like, they have their own work to do, so I try to assure them that I'll be like a fly on the wall, so I'm not going to be interrupting the work so much, but I have to have a bit of an idea about, what I want to film, how I want to film. And then most of the work comes in the editing process as well, because then that turns into its whole weaving together another story afterwards.
Yeah, can you go into depth a little bit more? So I've visited you in your studio. All you need is a desk and a computer, I guess. You have 2 screens, you have your material there, you work on voiceover, you create a narrative. You are in the process of a translation, I guess, from that observing role with the scientists on Flat Island on Mauritius, then creating a narrative out of the footage you have gathered, adding to it. Can you talk a little bit about the technical side of that and this translation process?
I think first I was just reviewing the material and then looking back at the journals, like I said, just to try to remember mostly the feelings and sensations. And then shortly after, I started a storyboard for the animation bits. And luckily, I'm working with really great collaborators at the moment. So we develop everything together, starting from mood boards, outlines for different stories. It can be very abstract, piecing these things together. And then also embedding into the animation things that you can't entirely read from the images, such as personal anecdotes or memories that I had, or for me, the poppy flower is a very important symbol that I embed in a lot of the works. And so you see those references in the animation. You can't entirely read it initially, but it's just these different layers and complex processes that I really develop in collaboration with the post-production people that I work with.
Is there clues or moments when you feel like this is a story I want to, where I go into the animation as opposed to the documentary filming, I guess, because this is the juxtaposition of the 2 formal approaches? Is there something in the process where you say this should not be represented through documentary lens, but be told from the speculative level that comes through the animation?
I think it just happens. I don't really think in terms of those binaries necessarily, but it just sort of happens fluidly in terms of how the images are one after the other. So I do make editing storyboards afterwards, but it's all very fluid.
So we've been using the term speculative storytelling a lot. So basically, what happens in this? Will this, by the way, be a 3-channel installation again?
It's going to be single channel.
Single channel, okay. So through this single channel installation, we will be, as a viewer, guided through the film, through the voice of a bird. We're taking the bird's perspective and flying over. We saw some aspects of this, and you use this as a tool. I guess the moment you use a bird to tell a story, there's already a level of speculation and artistic storytelling that has to be speculative, I guess. Sorry, I just keep going back to the term. But why do you think we need the speculativeness in regard to this topic?
I mean, for me, it's about. I mean, the research also included archival work as well, and as I mentioned, there's just a dearth of information. So I think that using fiction perhaps as a way to reveal other layers and stories from this history could be quite interesting. And the writer that I was working with, Akil, he was on the research team and is also writing fiction. So we shared these moments together when I was filming on Flat Island. So we just developed this story together, and we just imagined, okay, what are these other stories that could be told if we distance ourselves from what's actually happening, I think. So it can be a very creative way to tackle the topic.
A creative way to tackle the erasure, I guess, of narratives that have disappeared, and something that can add to archival ideas, I guess, as they are incomplete anyway, and how to fill that incompleteness, I guess. Mm-hmm.